So in the next slide, you'll see a couple of issues that we wanted to highlight as having, particular relevance to the question of who holds elected prosecutor positions. So as I said earlier, prosecutors exercise tremendous discretion in when to bring a case or when to drop charges and how a case might be handled. So there have been some high-profile cases recently in Indiana, which some of you may have heard about, in which, in one case, a prosecutor sent a woman to prison for terminating her pregnancy. There are other cases like that in various states, sort of a similar kind of unusual exercise of prosecutorial discretion to deal with pregnant women. Obviously, there's been a tremendous conversation across the country in the last year or two about police violence and the relationship between police and civilians, in particular African Americans. I think we're probably all familiar with the concern about cases in places like Ferguson, Staten Island, and elsewhere, and whether the law enforcement officers in those cases were appropriately prosecuted or not. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, prosecutors exercise a tremendous amount of discretion in determining what level of charges and sentences to pursue in a given case. And I think, as we all know, there are tremendous racial disparities in sentencing and incarceration in the United States. And so looking at who's making those kinds of decisions and what their backgrounds and life experiences are seems like it would open up a really fruitful avenue for thinking about why we have those disparities and where we might be able to intervene in the system in a productive way. So that's a kind of nutshell version of the prosecutor demographic study that we released last month. There's a lot more data which you are welcome to look at, again, at the website, which is wholiedsus.justice. And I'm, of course, happy to answer questions as well when we get to the question and answer part of the webinar. But before that, have the honor of introducing my co-panelists on this webinar, who have a tremendous amount of firsthand experience with electoral office, with the significance of law enforcement and the prosecutorial role, and are both alumna of Emerge programs. So I'm going to introduce both of them briefly and then turn over the discussion to them for some remarks about their own backgrounds, how they became engaged in law enforcement, and how and why they made the decision to run for office. So we have with us today an alumna of the Emerge Maine program, the District Attorney for Kennebec and Somerset Counties, Maeghan Maloney. And we also have an alumna of the Emerge Virginia program, the Sheriff of Fairfax County, Virginia, Stacey Kincaid. Let me say just a few words about each of them, and then I'll let them speak for themselves. Let me start with Maeghan, who is a native Mainer who grew up in the Pine Tree housing development in Lewiston, Maine, and attended Leavitt Area High School in Turner, where she graduated as valedictorian and class president. She was awarded a full scholarship to Swarthmore College and earned a bachelor's degree in political science. She continued to distinguish herself at Harvard Law School, where she earned a Truman Scholarship for Public Service and served as the president and editor of the Harvard Journal on Legislation before graduating with honors in 1997. In 2010, she ran a successful campaign to represent the citizens of Augusta's House District 57 and quickly established herself as an effective legislator. A lifelong Democrat, Maeghan is respected on both sides of the aisle for her commitment to the people of Maine, her reliance on well-researched facts when debating legislation, and her ability to discuss the issues and build consensus. Our other panelist, Stacey Kincaid, was sworn in 2013 as the first woman to lead the Fairfax County Sheriff's Office in its 271-year history. Congratulations. The sheriff serves Fairfax County, the city of Fairfax, and the towns of Herndon and Vienna, Virginia. Starting as a sheriff's deputy right out of college, Stacey worked her way up to the rank of captain before being elected sheriff. In 2008, she received the agency's highest honor, the Distinguished Service Award, which recognizes a career of sustained exemplary performance. Throughout her career, Stacey has taken an active leadership role in community relations, especially concerning the safety and well-being of children, seniors, and those suffering from mental illness. As sheriff, Stacey is deeply committed to leading the most professional, fiscally responsible, and innovative organization that ensures the safety and security of all the people she serves. In 2014, Lawyers Weekly presented Stacey with an Influential Women of Virginia Award. So I'm very honored to be speaking alongside these two panelists. I will turn it over to them, and perhaps we will start in the order that I gave your biographical information. So Maeghan, if you are queued up, I will turn it over to you first.
We are having a little difficulty with Megan's audio, actually, and Maeghan, if you can give me a call, we can work that out. So why don't we start with Stacey?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, well, good afternoon, and again, thank you for having me as one of the co-panelists. My career began immediately after college, almost a month after I had graduated. But prior to that, I had done an internship, completed my internship with the Fairfax Sheriff's Office. I was a political science major with a concentration in criminal justice. So my summer internship working with inmates and doing one-on-one counseling sparked my interest in becoming a deputy sheriff. Again, a month to the date after I graduated from college, I became employed with the Sheriff's Office and found myself attending the Criminal Justice Academy, which was very different from life as a college co-ed in that it was a very regimented environment. It was extremely male-dominated, and but again, it was an opportunity to do and be a part of something, a career that would give me great, give me the opportunity to pay it forward, to give back, and to try to make a difference. So that's how my career began. I have worked in all different areas within the Sheriff's Office, starting from working in the jail as a line deputy sheriff, all the way up through being promoted to supervisor, working in administrative positions as well as management positions, both in operational and, as I said, administrative. After achieving the rank of captain and trying to move forward to the next rank of major, it was very evident at that time that the only way I was going to get a promotion was to either retire from the Sheriff's Office and go somewhere else. So here I am today.
Great, thank you. Do we have Maeghan yet, or are we still working on that?
Still working on it. Should take 1 more minute. So if you want to go to the next question with.
Sure. So Stacey, could you talk a little bit about whether and how you feel that your experience as a woman, your perspective as a woman, has influenced your decision to run for office, or the work that you've done in the office that you hold?
Being a woman, of course, I think differently than a man, and in terms of the way that women have a lot to bring to the table in communication, in our ability to get things done, that we can do anything we want. But also a different side of me that was different from the previous administration was the community outreach and how significant that is in our community. Fairfax County is a very diverse community. And as I've said before, we need to respect and reflect the diversity of not only the people that we serve, but the inmate population that we have incarcerated. And without having that community relationship, maybe community policing, if you will, or being out within the community, there's just not a, I think we set ourselves up for more success than we do a failure. Because again, it has to do with meeting people from all different walks of life. And it's not just about one's skin color. It's about the different thoughts, values, ideas, and how we can work together collaboratively in order to get things done, in order to have safe communities. And again, at the end of the day, I believe we're all in this to do the best that we can in order to provide, a safe and secure community.
And do you have thoughts about how your experience as a woman has led you to take a different approach, or to sort of emphasize different kinds of priorities? How do you understand the relationship between those things?
Well, I just started my 29th year with the Sheriff's Office, so I have been through many different administrations. I know what it's like to have to work harder. I have fought for everything that I have ever put my mind to. No one gave anything to me. And I do understand that as a woman, it was an equal playing field. Now that I'm the sheriff, I have a seat at the table to ensure that we have an equal playing field internally. But I do things different. And again, as I mentioned, the outreach piece, where our involvement with communities, with leaders in the communities, also with many different services that we provide to not only our inmate population, but also to how that works very well for us. But I've had the opportunity to pay promotion of how well I did. It wasn't part of the plan. I wasn't part of the clique. I wasn't part of the good old boys club. So experiencing what I have experienced, and there's been other things with harassment, it's instilled within me to make sure that this never happens in culture as well. And sometimes that's a difficult thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Maeghan, are you here now?
I think I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, great, good. Thanks
Great.
for hanging in there with us. I'll just, if it's all right with you, I'll turn it over to you to say a few words about your background and your experience,
Sure.
and then I'll come back to both of you with some more questions.
Sure. So, well, when I decided to run for the trust myself was, if I don't run, then who's left in charge? And I asked myself whether it made a difference, whether it was me or somebody else. And there's no question that what you talked about in terms of the power that the district attorney has and where you can lead investigations and how crime is prosecuted, it makes a huge difference who's at the table. And I'll give you a specific example. When I was at my first chief's meeting, I had a chief sitting next to me and said, well, the activity is happening at that house again, and we know that women are being prostituted, so we'll keep an eye on it, but we're not going to do anything about it because we don't prosecute that in this district. And I was the next one to speak, and I looked at him and I said, what do you think about? And he looked at me and he said, oh, I absolutely see it differently. And so since then, I now have 2 convictions for sex trafficking in 2 separate cases, and we're cracking down on sex trafficking. It makes a difference who's at the table. I'm the only woman at the table at the chief's meetings. It makes a difference that I'm there. It makes a difference the perspective that I bring. I had a woman who, if charged with theft, she stole a $20 item from Marvin. If I charged her with theft, she was going to be deported because she didn't have her green card and she was living in a country from another country. she has a 10-year-old child who was born here. That 10-year-old child would not have been allowed to go with her because she was divorced from her husband. I didn't charge it. The person I ran against, there's no question he would have charged her because she committed the theft. She did. She committed the theft. But to me, the consequences have to fit the actions. I had her do community service, and once I got proof that she completed the community service, I simply declined the case. There's so much that you can do in this position, from things like I've already mentioned, and also we now have electronic monitoring for domestic violence cases. I've worked with the community to develop a substance abuse program instead of incarceration. It's unbelievable how much change that you can make in a position like this, and I absolutely love it.
That's so interesting. Could you talk a little bit about how you decided to run for office in the first place? It sounds like you held a position in the Maine legislature before the district attorney. And so what led you to that decision, and how did that all happen?
Well, I had worked as a district attorney, as an assistant district attorney when I first got out of law school. But I did it in a different state. I was in Portland, Oregon. When I came to Maine, I worked at the Attorney General's office as an assistant there. And I left the Attorney General's office to run for the Maine legislature. So and with district attorney positions, most people run unopposed. When there's an open seat, everybody runs because it's unusual. People tend to hold these seats for decades. So when there was an open seat, I'd only been in the House for 2 years, but I had some campaign experience. I had experience of being sort of one of those line prosecutors in Oregon and being a line assistant attorney general. So I just jumped in, and it was a tough decision in that I had to give up my House seat. But I weighed it, and I decided this opportunity isn't going to come around again. I'm fortunate that I had a wonderful team already that I had put together for my House race, which is a much smaller race, but I still needed a team to run. And that was the core group of people that I went to about this race. And once I decided to go in, I went in full force. I can tell you, I heard at one point my opponent say, that girl cannot do this job. And I'm telling you, 2 elections later, because now I've been reelected with 68% of the vote, I can do this job. And I love this job, and I love the people I work with, and I love working with the police. You have to overcome that. You have to be willing to say when someone talks about you that way, and when you look in the mirror and you don't see a standard district attorney look, you have to say, this is who I am, I accept myself, and I don't care what anyone else says. I'm not going to let that get under my skin. I talk about it as developing Teflon skin. You got to let it bounce off you. And if you take it in, they'll shut you down. But as long as you let those criticisms bounce off you and you say, yep, no, I don't look like a district attorney, but I do now, because now this is what a district attorney looks like.
Right.
So that's what you have to do.
Right. That's a great story. Thank you. I'm wondering if we could go back to Stacey for a minute. And there's a question from one of the participants via the chat here, asking that, you know, we know that we need more women at the table when it comes to criminal justice positions and criminal justice reform, for the reasons that I think you two have just highlighted. I guess for both of you, really, but we'll start with Stacey. What else do you think that we can do to encourage more women to go into law enforcement and to run for elected law enforcement positions?
From my experience, going from a deputy sheriff captain to a politician was definitely an eye-opening experience, because you often hear about, oh, there's office politics. I'm here to tell you that office politics versus real-life politics, no comparison. not even close, especially in the field of law enforcement, which is a completely different animal, so to speak. But one of the things that I would strongly recommend is that we prepare. We do a good job. We need to do a great job in preparing women and letting them know what to expect and not sugarcoating, anything. I mean, you're putting yourself out there. And as my other panelists mentioned, what does, a district attorney look like? What does a female sheriff look like? What are you supposed to look like? There's a difference. And even when I began the campaign, don't wear dresses. You have to wear the pantsuit. You have to look like a sheriff. Well, what does a sheriff look like? So those are just small things, but they're actually big things, because people are going to judge you. Regardless of what you say and do, people are going to judge you for how you talk, what you look like, how you carry yourself. And I was very fortunate that when I made that decision to run, I surrounded myself with women, and men too, that had already run for office, that were very successful in office, and that were able to provide guidance to me. So even with Emerge, which I applaud, I think Emerge is fantastic in helping prepare. But along with preparing someone, that individual needs to have the knowledge, skills, and abilities, and not just run because they're a woman, but also talk about what it is they're going to do when they do win, when they do get in office. So I think preparation and just telling it like it is the key, one of the keys to getting more women to run, but encouraging them as well.
Mm-hmm. Excuse me, and Maeghan, I wonder what you speak to this also, and if there is a particular obstacle that you felt like you faced in your own decision to run, either of the positions you've held, and how you dealt with that would be helpful to hear about as well.
Well, it's funny. People often told me that I looked too young to run for district attorney, but I was older than my opponent in the general election. I couldn't grow a beard. And so when they would tell me that I was too young, I looked too young, I had that response. I knew that I was going to hear that. And so I would make that joke. I would say, well, I tried, but I haven't been successful at growing a beard. And then it would sort of click in their mind, oh, I guess that was pretty sexist, wasn't it? For me to comment on your look, for me to comment that you don't look old enough. And then I would point out that I was actually older than my opponent. I just was ready for it, and I would make a joke out of it. I wouldn't take offense because I knew it was coming, and I knew they didn't mean, they didn't mean to be offensive. The other thing that I feel is really important for me to do at this point is to encourage other women to run. So I have a prosecutor in my office who I think is the world of, who runs. She does tremendous work, and so I've asked her to apply for Emerge, and I was her recommender. She did apply. She was accepted. That's what we have to do. The only way we're going to have more women in these offices is if we are on the lookout for great candidates who can do this work and who can make a difference. There's a woman at the sheriff's office who I'm constantly bugging to run for sheriff. My guess is she keeps telling me she's not going to, but I would love to see her run, and I certainly would support her if she made that decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm wondering, in our work on the Reflective Democracy campaign, we're very focused on the kind of the ways that the political system itself at various points creates additional or sort of greater obstacles for women and people of color. Obviously, there are obstacles for everybody, but they can be more pronounced for some groups than for others. And a couple of them that we really focused on are, for instance, the role of gatekeepers. So the political parties, major donors, sort of the organizations and the individuals who play a really key role in deciding who's going to get money and support and you know, various kinds of backing when a seat does open up. I wonder if either of you has any, you know, experience with that that would be interesting to share, or what role you felt like the political parties or other, as they're called, gatekeepers or kind of institutional players played in your own path to office.
Well, Emily's list helped me. I appreciated not only that they helped me with funding, they also helped me with advice, which was critical. I needed that. And the Democratic Party also helped me in organizing my campaign and with advice, with call lists and things like that. And then, honestly, I went to friends and families, and I went to my law school graduation, the reunion, my law school graduation reunion. And I had someone at that reunion stand up and say, hey, I'm going to match whatever money is donated to Maeghan tonight. So you need to think about all the ways that you're connected to people, and who the people who tend to be connected to you on a personal level are the ones who are going to give the most and give the earliest. And then from there, you can build.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Stacey, did you have any thoughts on this?
I did. From my perspective, it was a little different. When I ran 2 years ago, I was fortunate enough that the big race in Virginia was the governor's race, as well as lieutenant governor and attorney general. So there was a coordinated effort, which was extremely helpful. And being the only woman on the ticket, I think, was a benefit. And I like to remind our three top legislators that I helped them get into office because I was the only woman on the ticket. Now this go around, because I ran in a special election 2 years ago, it is quite different as far as the party and what the party's going to give. They're going to give to the Senate and the House before they give to a local sheriff's race. I'm fortunate that with the 1.2 million people in the county of Fairfax and the 24,000 in the city of Fairfax, again, it's about the relationships and about them wanting to keep me in office and the role that I play and the difference that I make. So it's that exposure that I've been very fortunate with in order to get funding. But it's very different because I'm not the individual who's going to make laws. I'm the individual that enforces the laws. So it's letting people know the importance and what matters. And so that's my experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's a question from one of the participants about, the question is, how do you build allies within the law enforcement and courts establishment when you are the outsider? And the second question related to that is it safe for them to support you when their chiefs or bosses are not? So I think the question is, if you're running as an outsider against a kind of establishment candidate, how do you build allies within the system? And you both might have some interesting perspective on this, given that it sounds, if I understand your careers correctly, you actually worked in some ways within the system before running for office in it. So you probably had your own relationships already, but I will throw the question to the two of you.
Okay. My situation was rather unique.
Let's start with
What's that? Okay, my situation was rather unique because I had been a 27-year veteran of the agency, and when our sheriff retired, he appointed an interim sheriff. So my primary was running against the interim sheriff, who, of course, I had known, and it was very challenging because it was almost a division within the agency because we both had friends from different, sides, but and I had worked for him before, so it made it more challenging. And again, being in a leadership position, there was another layer, and it was extremely uncomfortable. I had people that chose not to talk to me, to avoid me. And I thought, I've been doing this for a long time, and this is where my focus is. So I wasn't an outsider coming into it, but at one point it was just it was a very different situation, and it had never been done before. After the primary, and I won 2-1, I had an overwhelming win. I had asked the interim sheriff at the time to stay on as one of my chief deputies, because we wanted the same thing. We wanted what was best for the agency, and it wasn't supposed to be this division. It's just we were two different people and had two different, somewhat different thought processes, but we work very well together. I haven't felt in terms of other public safety personnel supporting me, and maybe their chief or what have you did not. I don't have that feeling, I don't have a difficult time with that, because we have a great relationship with the other public safety agencies, and through relationships and through memberships, it works out very well. So I'm really not the outsider, and I get along with lots of folks.
Mm-hmm. Maeghan?
Well, it's interesting hearing about the sheriff's story, because my initial election was very divisive as well. I was running against someone who was the interim DA. So while the sitting DA had been appointed to be a judge, there was an incumbent, so to speak. There's always going to be someone. Extremely divisive. So on that, I took a similar approach. I decided after the election, the past is the past. If you're willing to work with me now, we're moving forward, and I'm not holding grudges. I'm not thinking about what happened in the past. And I'm so glad that I took that approach, because now I'm working with some great people who otherwise I would have written off. But if I was completely, one of the things I did is I did make a list of all the people I'd be working with as district attorney, from the chief to the sheriff. I cover 2 counties, so I have two sheriffs that I work with. All of the police agencies, all of the chiefs' names, the state police, who's in charge there, all of the nonprofits that I work with, all of the county commissioners, the county administrators. I made a list of all of them, and I sat down and created a schedule that enabled me to meet with each and every one of them before the election. And that was key, because they ended up not endorsing in that primary race, which for someone who was an incumbent, for him not to get their endorsement was a big win for me. That they were willing to stay out of it was a big win for me. And I know that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't sat down and talked with all of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's another question, and both of you have touched on this a little bit, but it might be interesting to talk about a bit more, which a question from one of the participants about whether in your experience you think there is and I would say whether there's a gender bias for women running for law enforcement positions, and I would maybe emphasize a greater gender bias than potentially in other kinds of electoral positions, given the kind of, the way that, law enforcement is often talked about and conceived of as a very kind of masculine thing. And I wonder, and the participant asks, so, do you think there is a greater gender bias for women running for law enforcement positions? And then do you have any advice for women to work around it? And again, you've both touched on this a bit, but I wanted to kind of ask that question specifically. Stacey, we'll start with you this time again. Sorry, I should specify. Let's start with Stacey.
Okay. I would like to think that there isn't. But I would not want to fool anyone, because women are still underrepresented in law enforcement. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, out of 123 sheriffs, only 4 of us are women. We are very fortunate in the DC metropolitan area, because women have already begun and women have already started breaking barriers. We have Kathy Lanier, who is the chief of police for the District of Columbia. We have one of my good friends, Beth Arthur, who is the sheriff of Arlington County, Virginia, and Mary Gavin, who's the City of Falls Church police chief, and we have another female police chief in the town of Herndon, Virginia. So it's becoming more accepted, if you will, and I think people are recognizing that women can do the job. I mean, certainly we have to go through a lot to get where we are now, but more people are realizing it, whereas in the past, I remember leading a squad of men, some were prior military, and the thought of them taking an order from a female was something that was very foreign to them. But again, it's all in how you work with people, and that's when there's an opportunity to show that you are just as qualified as anybody else. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And not only because you're a woman, but because you are qualified. So.
Mm-hmm. Great. Maeghan?
I definitely feel like I have to work longer hours than anyone else in my office. I don't know if I would feel that way if I wasn't a woman, but I feel like I have to show how much I care about this. I go to countless community events. I'm very visible because I don't take it for granted. I think, though, when it came to I think my biggest barrier was before I was elected. Being a rank and file member of the legal profession, it's hard as a woman. There are definitely people who will treat you differently. And you have to keep your confidence up and keep working hard and not let it get to you. At one point I was working in a law firm, and I had just a horrible time with a particular partner. And frankly, it was embarrassing for me because I had never had a bad experience in anything that I'd ever undertaken before. You know, I'd always been able to achieve what I wanted to achieve. And I couldn't do it now. I couldn't seem to please this person. I reached out to some of the other female associates in my office, and I actually told them what I was experiencing. And what was amazing to me is that they broke down and told me they were going through the same thing. And that's when I realized, okay, it actually has to do with our gender, where we're being treated differently. But it was hard to admit to anyone that there was a problem. So to overcome that and to be willing to say, yes, that this is happening, that really helped me. It helped me to get through it, and I know it helped them for us to be able to know that we weren't alone. Now that I'm in this position, I actually think in some ways it helps me to be a woman, because people see me as an agent for change, and they want change, and that's why they elected me. They don't want things done the same way they were always done. And so since I was running on a message of change, it actually helped me to look like the message that I was conveying. And I think that there are people who vote for me because they like seeing a strong woman in office.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, before we wrap up, I wanted to ask each of you one more question, which is, now that you both have a few years under your belt in elected office, what's the sort of one, if you could narrow it down to one piece of advice or one kind of takeaway idea that you would want to communicate to other women thinking about running for law enforcement positions, what would that be? And I know it may be hard to choose just one, but Stacey, I'll put you on the spot first if I can. What would you say to, what's the sort of biggest thing that you know now that you maybe wish you had known then? Ooh, I think we lost your audio.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah.
One thing I wish I knew, You know what? That's a tough question. That's a very tough question because there's a lot of things that, you know, you wish you knew then and now you know now. Do you want to go to Maeghan? I hate to divert this to Maeghan, but
it's a difficult question, I know. Maeghan, do you have a thought at the top of your head?
Well, the biggest piece of advice that I would have is I find that I myself, and I know a lot of women, tend to be very critical of themselves. And I'm very good at picking out all of my faults. And to remember that everyone has faults. You're going to see bad things about yourself. You're not going to do things perfectly. You're going to open up the newspaper and say, wow, did I really say it that way? Because it sounded so much better in my head than the way it looks in print. You got to forgive yourself for that. Just keep going. Just keep moving forward. Feel the wave behind you. You need to feel how much people need you to do this work. We need more women running. We do make different decisions. We do have a different perspective. And when we don't have women running, it changes our country. Run, don't give up. And if you need advice, you're feeling down, reach out to another woman and get that advice and get that encouragement, because you'll get it. You've got to pick up the phone, you got to reach out, and you will get that encouragement, and keep going.
Great, thank you.
One of the things, if I can just answer that question, I mean, there's a lot that I'm thinking about right now, but make sure you prepare yourself. I mean, again, having the qualifications and the experience and the knowledge, make sure that you're able to sell yourself, convey your message, and why you are the best candidate for the job. So again, you have to work twice as hard as a man will ever have to work. That's my experience, but why you? And not so much as what someone else's record is about. I mean, I take pride in running a clean and dignified campaign, and regardless of what you read in the newspaper, and that's tough because you're going to read things in the newspaper and you're going to think, where did that come from? Just continue to run like you're losing, have confidence in yourself, and you can be tough. You have to have Teflon skin, because this is not for the weak. It really, really isn't, but we can make a difference, and having that goal and knowing that you can do the best job is just keep that in mind. And also have a trusted advisor, someone that's not afraid to, or is going to tell you the truth regardless of whether you want to hear it or not, because the truth hurts sometimes, but the trusted advisor is definitely a key to have.
Mm-hmm. Great, that's so interesting. Any last thoughts from either of you before we wrap up? Anything you didn't get a chance to say that you'd like to say?
I could add, I have 2 children, and I know for women that having children, that's often a part of the balance of trying to decide if this is possible. So on that, one thing, I take my kids everywhere. They've marched in every parade with me. They've gone to every community dinner you can possibly imagine. And they're ridiculous extroverts as a result. They're great kids. I mean, they haven't had a sort of regular childhood. They've had a different childhood. But that's okay. I incorporate them into what I do. I don't try to leave them behind because I want to be a part of their life. I want them to be a part of my life. The other thing, I've been married for 22 years, and from the beginning, we've always had an understanding that my husband's always agreed that his primary role is to be with the kids, and mine is to be involved in my career. So having an understanding partner is also key. And to have those conversations explicit. Don't think that, it's understood that when you come home at 10 o'clock at night that the other person needs to do the dishes. You really have to have it explicit. You have to have a plan. You need to talk about it and incorporate your family into as much as you possibly can. And that's what makes the work-life balance happen. Otherwise, you just don't see your family enough if they're not a part of what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Thank you. Stacey, any last thoughts?
The last thoughts, before you even consider running, family is first. Family's first in my book, and I tell my staff, 612 of them, family always comes first. And it's important that you take the time to sit down with your family, let them know what you're in, get their support, because your family's always going to be there for you. And I'm fortunate enough that my husband is in law enforcement. He's a captain with the Virginia State Police. And like you mentioned, Maeghan, the expectation of who's going to do what, and we understand one another, and he gets it, and he's very supportive. Unlike you, if I come home at 10 o'clock at night, I expect the dishes to be done in the kitchen, but I'm joking. But make sure that your entire family, regardless of if they live locally or they live out of state, because again, they'll be very much a part of it. And they, of course, will read and hear things. So make sure that you get your family's support.
Great. I want to thank you both so much for being part of this today. You're both such interesting and inspiring figures, and sharing your own experience and stories is really interesting for me, and I'm sure for the other participants on the webinar. So best of luck to you. Thank you again, and thank you to everybody for participating today.
Thank you.
Bye.